EP.6. My name is Jacob Corey.
I'm Matt Pavlik.
And we're joined today by a pair of guests, level 2 judges.
I'm Kevin Long. I'm from the Los Angeles area.
Hey, I'm Michael Nixon from the Vancouver area.
This week we're actually missing a pair of our podcasters. We're missing Sam, our esteemed editor, and Sean O'Brien, who's still stuck in a board meeting discussing ways to take over the world. So this week we have a special treat. My good friend Kevin, he's a judge, as well as Michael Nixon. I believe he's friends with Matt. And they agreed to come on the show and share some of their insights from being on the judging side of tournaments. So let's dive right in. Kevin, Michael, do you guys want to share with us some of your experiences judging Eternal events versus modern standard or limited events, and some of the things that you notice maybe from the Eternal crowd where you don't really see them in your F&M crowd?
Yeah, sure. I think that one of the best things about judging Eternal is that players tend to be way more prepared in general. They tend to know what their cards do. They tend to know what their opponent's cards do. And you don't get the same sort of 10-year-old to 13-year-old crowd playing Legacy who don't really know what they're doing so well. So I think that's makes it easier in some regards. Although given the larger card pool and more amount of decks and interactions and stuff like that, it's more complicated. But I actually prefer judging Eternal formats in general to non-Eternal formats for reasons like that.
Yeah, I agree. I found players are often more knowledgeable with their cards. They generally know what's going on. Although there's sometimes I have seen maybe a little bit of, I know this works, everyone knows this works, but they're not necessarily able to break it down if they were to need to. I have seen that sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of this works on Moto, but I don't really understand how it works. Rules interactions. And that's another lesson, is that Magic Online is not Magic.
But all the cards are the same, right?
Sometimes. I find that most of the time that Magic Online is just trying to make do. They're just trying to make a semblance of real life.
So maybe you guys have an example of something that you could do in real life Magic, but that you couldn't necessarily do on Magic Online.
Well, for a while, eternally important, there was a bug on Magic Online where if you had a Blood Moon out, your Dryad Arbor wasn't a creature anymore. Which is not the case. It is still a 1/1.
It just doesn't tap for green. Correct?
Yeah, it can tap for red, but not for green.
Interesting. I can imagine how, let's say, a player that was preparing for Legacy Eternal, playing on Magic Online, thinking that was the norm, and then being very confused when his opponent was able to tap Dryad Arbor, for instance, for red mana.
Yeah.
The other difference, I suppose, comes down to an arbitrarily large combo where you're going to say, in real life, you can say, I do this 10,000 times. You agree, we agree, all right, it's done. Whereas on Moto, you're going to have to click through the process, which does, there's often formats where, that deck doesn't work online, so kind of warps the metagame.
So let's talk about the Four Horsemen. I've heard a lot about this deck. I don't quite understand what happened with some of the rulings in LA, Star City LA. Maybe you guys want to talk about what went wrong there?
Yeah, well, basically, there was a rules change recently to the slow play part of the infraction penalty guide, or infraction procedure guide now, which was that if you cannot say, if you're intending to start a loop, and you can't say the exact iterations of the loop, then trying to go through the loop is considered slow play. This is very stripped down. So, for instance, if I'm a Four Horsemen player, I know that eventually I can get the only card in my deck to be Emrakul, and then I can kill you. But I can't tell you how many iterations of tapping and untapping Basalt Monolith that will actually take. So, because of that reason, that is now defined as slow play.
Now, Kevin, I understand it's even a little more complicated than that because You're not allowed to use the iteration rule because you can't state a number. However, I believe you're allowed to actually go through the process until it becomes repetitive.
Yes. So there's a little bit more nuance than that. I mean, it used to be when you're playing Four Horsemen, you can just say, I'm going to kill you eventually, and your opponent's like, yeah, sure. But you can now start to go through the process of milling yourself with Mesmeric Orb, and start to shuffle up with Emrakul and eventually get there. But once you start to do things that becomes repetitive, as in milling Emrakul, let's say twice or maybe 3 times, and reshuffling your library, you will have to change the game state. You have to advance the game state at some point in order for it to not be slow play.
So then, to interject, how many times could you attempt to physically do the combo and mill before your opponent should or could call a judge and be like, okay, this is slow play?
That's actually a tricky question because it's not set in stone. It's basically up to judges' discretion. There's no hard numbers. There aren't any even suggestions for hard numbers. So it's very much judge dependent, but I'd say in general you could get 2 or 3, maybe up to 5 times.
Okay.
That does make it hard, nonetheless, to recommend to anyone that they take Four Horsemen to a competitive rules enforcement level tournament, though.
Yeah, definitely.
So maybe we can talk about the different levels of rules enforcement. What are they, and what are the player expectations for each of those?
Yeah, it's actually pretty simple at this point. There's regular, there's competitive, and then there's professional. And they actually sound very much like what we would want from the players. Regular rules enforcement level is basically casual. It's FNM. It's more about fun than about having a complete and correct game state at all times. Whereas competitive, we want players to know the interactions. We want players to know the cards that they're bringing, and to be able to play their deck in a quick manner. And then professional, it's everything even more so.
Cool. So let's say I built my not 4 horseman deck. Let's say I built only 2 horsemen. Rug Delver, for instance.
Okay.
And I hear about a legacy tournament around my area, and they're offering some card prize, maybe like a pair of underground seeds for first place. What would be the expectations of me as a player going into that tournament? What would I need to bring? How do I prepare for that tournament? When should I call a judge?
Basically, to answer the last question first, whenever you feel like there's anything wrong or a judge could help the situation in terms of either clarity or rules knowledge or anything like that, whenever you feel like you need a judge, call a judge. And if you think your opponent's cheating, always call a judge. That's just a general rule that everyone should always adhere to. But if you're coming into a tournament and you're a generally new Legacy player, I would recommend learning your deck first. Just be able to know all your card interactions, know how you are trying to interact with your opponent, just such that the tournament can move a little quicker. In terms of bringing things, I would always bring a pad of paper and a pencil or pen and some dice. But that's not actually necessary. You don't actually need to bring anything.
Okay, Nixon, what is your take on this?
I think the main thing I would throw out for competitive level events where I see newer players getting in trouble is with deck lists. And I think you guys have talked about in the past the rules changes to deck lists, but one of the things the new rules let us do is not necessarily give out as many deck list penalties. And so I see new players come and, I need a deck list, 5 minutes into the tournament, oops. Or I'm going to scribble one down now, things like that. And, you can just avoid those altogether by doing them ahead of time or any kind of preparation there. Just don't be in a rush, don't be in a worry, and just just avoid those problems.
Yeah, deck lists are actually the place where I think most players get the most amount of penalties, just because it's so easy to screw up. I mean, the last tournament that I was judging, actually, I gave a game loss for a player who registered Inquisition instead of Inquisition of Kozilek. And Inquisition is in fact a card from the dark, and it's terrible, probably. I don't even know what it does. But I'm fairly certain that he didn't want to play Inquisition and instead wanted to play Inquisition of Kozilek.
So now I have a question for Nixon, and then Kevin, you can add on after. What do you think is probably one of the most commonly asked questions or incorrectly known rulings or rules or set of interactions that Legacy players or just any Magic player should know at a competitive level event, but they don't?
Well, I mean, one interaction that I can think of is to do with what you're allowed to do to resolve a game of Magic. And I think some Legacy players play fairly casually at times, and I think I've seen at Legacy events more than others a tendency to get into the danger territory regarding, let's do something to resolve this match. Let's, you know what I'm getting at? We're not necessarily coin flips, but splitting and stuff that's going to get you into danger territory. I think because players are often very just friendly about it. At a certain point, they're like, all right, we're all happy. We're just going to, split the money and go. And sometimes they can get into dangerous territory more often than other players who just assume, oh, just play it out and what happens at the end happens. So I have seen that a little more often in Legacy.
Yeah, there are some times in which Legacy tournaments, the people at them tend to be a little bit more talkative. They like to have fun, especially in Los Angeles. The Eternal community is very very strong and very willing to just go out and have a good time. So that leads occasionally to people commenting on the game state in matches, which can be outside assistance. And I think that is a very overlooked rule right now in players' minds.
I can definitely say I've accidentally done that before, even to you, Nixon. I'm sorry. Where you just, you comment on a game state because, you're an observer and you're all friends, but you're like, oh, you missed your Dark Confidant trigger, Lyle, and it's like, oh, oops, and suddenly now everything has to stop and change, and do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, that's actually an interesting point to bring up because, it used to be the case where, hey, anything goes wrong, stop the game, call a judge. But with the new miss trigger rules, players are allowed to miss those. So to an outside observer, it appears as though they're breaking the rules when in fact they're forgetting their trigger. And so in the past, where it might have been perfectly appropriate to say, hey guys, just stop the game, something's going wrong, we're going to call a judge and get that fixed up. Now it's like, oh, you just reminded them of a trigger which the opponent would love them to keep on missing. So it definitely pushes us towards telling players, get a judge away from it and or double check with someone else who's watching maybe, just to make sure, confirm your understanding before you necessarily let them know about that.
Let's say that you are watching a Legacy match and you see something happen that you don't think is right. As a player in that tournament, for instance, what kind of steps should you take to, let's say, fix the game? Let's say your friend is playing and you don't want them to, let's say, lose a game because their opponent is messing up a play. What recourse do you have as a player to fix that game state?
Well, the one thing to never, ever, ever do is to tell the players exactly what happened. You just never want to do that. I would say the safest recourse is to simply call a judge or find a judge and bring him or her over to and explain what happened. If it's a mistake that you actually notice that would be like somebody playing their card wrong or something that affects the game state as a whole, then you can stop the match and then call a judge over. And that's basically the safest thing that you as an observer can do.
So, like, let's say your friend is playing against a dredge deck, and one of your friend's creature dies, and the opponent forgets to exile the bridges.
Let's see. I don't know who controls the bridge triggers. I'd have to read it.
This was relevant in a uh, modern draft, actually, modern Masters draft. It's actually pretty rare to see Bridge from Below being in a draft deck, but there was one degenerate who decided to put it in his dredge deck. It ended up almost working out too.
Yeah, so it is. If you have the Bridge from Below in your yard, you do control the trigger, so you definitely have to say something. I would say at that point, you should call a judge because it is a detrimental trigger. So at that point we would be giving that player a warning for a mistrigger.
That sounds pretty harsh. Let's say what would happen if the player kept on making these mistakes, game rule violations and whatnot?
Well, there are clear upgrade paths in the infraction procedure guide. Normally, they are warning, then another warning, then a game loss, and then a match loss for the same infraction. Infractions being things generally like game rules violation or mistrigger or stuff like that. So we tend to keep track of repeated infractions of the same thing pretty closely.
It's all about the category in which things happen. So, if you're relatively new and you forget this one thing and then this other thing, that's not the kind of reason we're tracking it for. We're looking for people who are, getting their edges and repeating this sort of same thing over and over again. So it's definitely about the repeated issues.
Yeah.
So you're telling me I could potentially be a new player and I play a little fast with my rules, knowledge, for instance. I don't know what I'm really doing. I'm playing a dredge deck. And I could potentially make a bunch of different mistakes, but I'll get warnings for all of them, but they may be not enough to upgrade to a game loss.
Yeah. We depending on what mistakes you're making, that could be true. But in general, I would try and be lenient with a new player who's trying to just get into the older formats and stuff like that, as opposed to a player who has been playing for a very long time who is repeatedly missing the same sort of thing or doing the same sort of thing wrong.
So then the question I have is, if you are calling a judge to ask for help on an interaction as a new player or something, how far can the judge go in either advising you or explaining an interaction?
Well, it's interesting because we don't want to help the players play Magic. We don't want to give strategic advice.
Yeah, it's going to come down to exactly that. So it can actually be tricky at times because if you ask the wrong question as a player, you can get yourself in a position where the judge has no recourse but to give you an answer that is going to be unhelpful. So if you find a judge who's sort of staring back at you kind of like, quizzically, or hopefully they might even say something like, what's the rules issue you're trying to get at? You should realize that you may be asking the wrong sort of question. So for example, I've had this come up. Can I name something with pithing needle? Well, the answer invariably has to be yes. It doesn't matter that naming it won't do anything in some cases. The judge has to stare back at you and be like, yes, and then sit there and watch as you waste your pithing needle. So that can be an issue.
I'd say in general, if you ask a question and the judge says a one-word answer and then sits down next to you, you asked the wrong question.
Yep.
I got a question, a card-specific question. Spellscape.
Okay.
How do you exactly play this card?
Well, that's a very broad question. Why don't you narrow that down? Like, how do you play it in terms of what? In the terms of playing correctly, or in terms of trying to lose the most amount of life?
I'm trying to get from you guys a couple of strategy questions here, but you guys are pulling a judge card on me and saying, I don't understand your question. Can you ask it in another way? So I think this actually came up for me in a legacy match. I was playing Painter Stone with Goblin Welders and Tezzeret, and a whole bunch of really interesting interactions that I thought were really clever, but ended up not being that good. But one of the cards that I kind of came up with to answer Abrupt Decay was Spellscape. Now, and throughout the tournament, I found various uses for it. And the situation that really came up was Spellskite against a Terastodon. Maybe you can talk about why or why it doesn't work. Michael, maybe you want to jump in?
Sure. I mean, there's a couple things to point out with Spellskite. First of all, you can activate it as long as you have a legal target, a spell or ability. And so that can again be a situation where someone says, hey, can I target this with Spellskite? Sure can. If it's not a legal target, it's not going to change. Nothing is going to work out for you that way. The other thing that comes up that I think you're getting at is, what do you do when something has multiple targets? That's not going to quite work out the way that you want. You're going to have to activate it multiple times in order to grab all of the targets.
Okay, so let's say I'm casting Fireball with, X is 3 and Y is 4, which means we paid.
Wait, so this is the beatdown version of Fireball?
Yes, that's right. Some versions of Fireball actually were they printed with an X and a Y?
Beatdown's the only one.
Oh, that's excellent. So suppose my opponent casts Fireball for X is 3 and Y is 4. And the Y signifies how many targets, the X signifies damage. Can I, this is me as a player asking a judge, can I activate Spellskite to redirect to Spellskite?
Yeah, no problem.
And then you would say yes and sit down, and I would kind of scratch my head thinking, okay, how do I do this?
Yeah, exactly.
Any hints?
So I think the better question to ask the judges would be, because Fireball has multiple targets, would you need to activate Spellskite individually for these individual Ys, the number of targets for Fireball?
I think you might even be able to get away with asking, what do I have to do to make it so only Spellskite dies? What do you think, Kevin? Would you be happy with that?
Yeah, I would say that. I would say that that's a very reasonable question. Or even something like, if I activate Spellskite, will Fireball still target other targets? If I activate Spellskite once.
Yeah, that's a lot of Phyrexian blue mana.
Yeah. Well, the problem here is that we're speculating about questions with all the knowledge. So I think getting in a player's head who doesn't know all these rules, you end up getting things like, or questions like, can I use Spellskite to redirect Fireball to only hit Spellskite? In which the answer is absolutely yes. But you can't only activate it once if it has more than one target.
Matt, I know you were sharing with me last night an interaction with regeneration.
Oh, yeah. So, I'll tell the story here, because obviously we didn't record last night. So, I'll set the scene for you. GP Providence, 2011, Mental Misstep Mania. I decided to run Thrun the Last Troll to combat the Stoneblade decks, and it was a good choice. So I'm playing against, red-blue control with, Standstill and, Nevinrul's Disc and whatever. So I have Thrun the Last Troll on board, he's pounding face, and this other guy is going to die 100%. He has a Nevinrul's Disc out and decides to activate, and he says, I'm activating Nevinrul's Disc. What are you doing? And I said, well, I will activate Thrun the Last Troll such that Thrun survives. He says, when are you doing it? And I repeated, so that he doesn't die, whenever that has to be. So, that wasn't specific enough for my opponent. Also, I had no idea how regeneration worked, because I hadn't played with regeneration since, 6th or pre-6th. So, I wasn't really I'd never actually had to regenerate it. That wasn't ever an issue. So I called the judge over, and I say, okay, well, so this is what's going on. This is the board state. So when do I actually need to activate Thrun the Last Troll to have it survive and win this game and whatever? And the judge just kind of looks at me and explains regeneration, that it's a bubble effect, so you would need to do it prior to any sort of thing. So, of course, me being stone stupid about this, basically said, so I just activated then, and he just kindly, very calmly, repeats the exact same explanation. So, basically, after about 3 or 4 tries where I'm trying to get information out of him, of is this how I do it? And he can't give me strategic advice, but he just kind of explains that it's a bubble effect. And personally, I thought it was really nice that this judge he knew what I was trying to do, and I was just so stupid, but he was so calmly and nicely trying to explain it in the best and simplest way possible so that I would get it. And eventually I did, but it was really nice to have a judge there that was understanding that I had no idea what in the hell I was doing, and was just trying to get it done. So I appreciated that very much.
Yeah, that's a great example of a good judge who isn't giving strategic advice, but is still, doing his job.
That being said, I want to throw in a point about communication here. I think it's being expressed at every level of sort of the judging community that we're not here to play word gotcha. And so if your opponent says, I'm popping my disc, and you're like, I'm going to regenerate so my guy doesn't die, no one is going to let the opponent trick you into screwing up the stack somehow so your guy dies. As long as you're clear about your objective and how you're accomplishing it, I'm playing green and 1 to regenerate Thrun so he doesn't die. That's clear. Your intent is clear. The mechanic you're using to do it is clear. There's no reason you should end up with a dead Thrun because your opponent manages to get you to say, after you, or something like that.
Yeah, we don't want players to be able to trick other players into doing something that they don't want to do when you have a very clear, express notion of what you are doing and what you want to do.
That reminds me, though, that the one word I would recommend players forget, erase from their vocabulary, is the word okay.
Yeah, oh god, okay means a billion different things. Because occasionally it's okay, that spell resolves, and other times it's okay, I'm thinking about it, and even more times it's okay, this thing dies, and just be expressly clear with what you're trying to do and what and where you are in a turn.
I think one of the habits that I kind of picked up from playing on Magic Workstation, that good yet awful program that I'm sure quite a few of you have tried to run, is just using the phrase thinking, because there is a thinking button in on Workstation. So just, my opponents sometimes find it weird when, I don't say when there's a spell on the stack or something, there's no some people say hold on, I just literally just say thinking, but I think that's a good way to interrupt and just basically say, hold on a second, it's not necessarily okay, let's go through this. Let's wait. I might have responses.
Yeah, and it's also very unambiguous.
Yeah, what you don't want to say in that situation is, okay, because then you get your Thrun's in the bin. Judge,
yeah.
He said okay.
Judge, he didn't let me finish my sentence.
Right, and we don't like to be, that's just miserable for all of us.
Maybe you guys can share some weird judge calls that you guys have gotten, let's say throughout the years, some of the more interesting ones perhaps.
Well, let's see. I think this was my second judge call ever in a Legacy event. I was actually not even a judge at this point. This was a few years ago, but the question was, I am targeting my opponent's Lion's Eye Diamond with this Crozen Grip. Can he activate it?
Oh god.
Yeah, right?
What year is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. This was a couple years ago, so the answer was no, because Lion's Eye Diamond is a mana ability that you can only play at the time when you could play an instant, which is the most weird thing ever. But I think that was a very good introduction to the craziness that can be Legacy rules interactions.
Sure, I mean, you can get good ones. For example, with that aforementioned Thrun, did you know you can force of will Thrun? You sure can. It's not going to accomplish what you want. You're going to 0 for 2 yourself, but, that's fine.
Yeah, that's got to be the best Thrun with a hymn writer
Absolutely.
sitting on it.
So let me set the scene for that story. So we're actually, Nixon and I are spectating about a match where Thrun is a possibility.
I was playing in that one, Matt.
Oh, you were
Yes.
playing? Oh god. Okay. So Nixon is playing against a friend of ours, and we're talking about this very thing about can you target an uncounterable with a counter spell, how it actually works, and we're sitting there discussing this and stroking our chins about how interesting this is, and it's great, and 2 seconds later, our friend casts. No, you cast Thron
Yep.
Nixon, and our friend goes force of will, pitching some card, and we just sit there and stare at him for a few seconds and then laugh.
Yeah, this was casual. So the answer was, this is not going to turn out well for you.
Yeah, I think I actually had that call once, except for a humility was on the field,
Okay,
God.
sure.
which made the player who had the force of will think that he was all good and skippy and clear, but sadly, that was not the case.
Speaking of humility,
Oh goodness.
yeah, this is like the judge's bane of existence, right?
Sometimes. Once you figure it out, though, once you figure out that how humility works, then conspiracy becomes the judge's bane.
For the uninitiated, what is conspiracy?
Conspiracy is the number one card that creates dependencies, which is a very complex rule. But basically, if in how static abilities interact, is a rules section that is defined as layers, which is how we decide how humility works and how it interacts with other things. Conspiracy is an enchantment that you choose a creature type, and creature cards that are everywhere are the chosen type. And it's the number one thing that creates dependencies, which are if a thing would be interacting on the same layer, and one, instead of being on timestamps, if they come into play at the same time, one thing can be dependent on another. One card could be dependent on another for its interaction and for its what it's doing. Basically, that probably didn't make any sense. It's very complicated.
I think I might need to open up a tome of judge's knowledge to be able to understand what just happened.
Alls I knows about layers is, for some reason or another, Painter's Servant under humility will still get to throw its paint everywhere.
Oh yeah, it's pretty cool.
Very frustrating, actually.
Yeah, humility is not the end-all answer that you want it to be.
No, it isn't.
I think
So
another one of the classics that they got me. I was judging a side event at a Grand Prix, and it's the classic Sylvan Library happened. Can't remember exactly what happened with it, but I was answering the question, and then I realized I didn't know what rules enforcement level they had actually set the event at. Excuse me a minute, let me go talk to the head judge. Oh, this is a regular REL event. All right, I'll just come up with a solution. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah. There are infinite Sylvan's Library questions that happen in Legacy. The main ones being, how does it interact with Dredge?
Oh god.
Which is always, you're always screwed. You always have to pay the life. It's great.
Well, no, not necessarily.
Unless you only dredge one card and put the other two back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
what happens if you dredge all three?
Then
You have
get
to pay 8.
profit.
You just have to suck it up.
No, I don't think you get to. You don't have to. There's not 4 life on those other dredges, because those are replacements, aren't they?
Yeah, but then you then Sylvan Library looks at the cards drawn, the fact that you drew cards and then you have to put some back and you can't put any more back, so you just have to pay 8 life.
I'm
fairly uncertain about that.
because we
For
actually
instance-
we talked about this actually in a thread not too long ago on the source, and multiple judges chimed in to say the opposite. Not to contradict you for the sake of contradicting you. It's just this is kind of important.
Yeah.
Yeah, for instance, my understanding of Sylvan Library...
Oh yeah, no, never mind. If you haven't actually drawn cards, then the pay for life has no effect. I just had to reread Sylvan Library because it said instead of because there were no cards drawn, so for each of those, I was going off an older text of Sylvan.
Were you reading your Sylvan Library? How
Yeah, the
dare
fact
you?
that
Yeah, right.
Did it have a 0 ability on there?
No, it was the Legends one.
So let's point out why Sylvan Library is problematic, and the reason is because it refers to cards that have been drawn this turn. the game knows how to verify that. So if you don't do anything different than you would normally do, you just put them in your hand, the game can technically know that you have put the right 2 cards back, for example, but there's no external way to validate that. And since we can't have a judge sitting at every table with a Sylvan library, we have to use the opposite of what you want, which is if you can't prove that card was drawn this turn, you're considered to have paid the life to have drawn it.
Yeah.
So does that mean that you should, if you're in a tournament and you're playing Sylvan Library, should you resolve a Sylvan Library trigger much like a Ponder?
Yes, almost exactly like it. It gets more complicated if you've cast, say, Brainstorm in your upkeep or something like that.
What would happen if you miracled a Reforged Soul and then put your Sylvan Library trigger on the stack?
So you've drawn a whole new hand, right?
Yes.
Well, they've all been drawn this turn. That's neat.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's an easy one.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's just all upside. Seems good.
Note to self. Put Reforged Soul into every deck.
There was a Sylvan Library-like question that I actually got at GP Vegas, which was very interesting, which was a player cast Petals of Insight and looks at the top 3 cards of his library and shuffles them around and then draws 2 and then dredges the last one. But the interesting thing about Petals of Insight is that you only put them back in any order if you're putting them on the bottom of your library. You can't reorder them if you're putting them back on top and drawing them.
Interesting.
So
now,
Didn't even know that.
speaking of Petals of Insight, though, now, I don't know if you guys remember the old
Omniscience.
in quotes, Omniscience Petals of Insight kill.
Yeah.
So now, does that still work? Because don't you have to set up because you can't know the number of iterations that you're going to do so that you have.
Yes, you actually can. I actually played that Omniscience deck when when Petals of Insight was the only kill, basically. And I did all the math. I did all the math to bubble sort, and I said that at most it will be this number of iterations, period. No matter no matter how many cards you have left in your library, as long as your deck is 60 cards, it will be this number of iterations to sort your deck. And so I just showed them the math and was like, I'll do it this many times, no matter what.
But could you not say that then with the 4 Horsemen thing?
No, because it's random. Because you are reshuffling due to Emrakul, and you don't know where the Emrakul is going to end up.
Okay, I forgot about the shuffle.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
Could you also, for instance, going back to that example, could you, for instance, set up a scenario, say, I'm going to look at the top 3 and put them down the bottom at least 20 times, and then continue until I find a Burning Wish? Is that a valid explanation of what you want to do and essentially describe it quickly?
Yes, I would say that's fine. Because you have a number of iterations of the loop that's 20, and then you're just gonna do that, and you don't know the exact end of the iteration of the loop.
But there's, let's say, for instance, an exit condition.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's like towing the line between reasonable and unreasonable. I would allow it. Maybe Nixon has a different opinion.
Nope. No different opinion.
Yeah, so, sure.
So,
with a caveat
Nixon
of
and,
maybe.
Kevin Long are judging your event. Go right ahead.
Yeah.
Of course, that's going to depend on the specific judge at the specific event.
Yeah,
So,
which also opens up another comment, is that not all judges are the same, and the rules are, or rather, not the comp rules, but the judging rules basically are still kind of open to interpretation, somewhat. There is a lot of disagreement in the judge community about what to do about certain things and how to handle certain things. But we will generally strive to make all events the same. So eventually we'll figure it out, and eventually it will be the same. But for now, it's going to be a little bit different.
And I'll just point out, that's fairly minimal in fairly specific areas. We're at a point in the judge program now where it's not like you're showing up to an event and hoping that they've heard of the comprehensive rules or something like that.
Yeah.
We're talking about, there's certain philosophical agreements. Like, for example, when I mentioned, what should an outsider do, or a spectator do, when they see something go wrong in the tournament? we could probably, judges could probably have a day-long conversation about exactly when they can stop the match versus not, or something like that. But we're talking about, small things like that, not, how does X really big important thing work.
Yeah, there will always be corner cases, and that is just one of the reasons why Magic is awesome. But for all non-corner cases, I think judges are pretty much on the same page.
Cool. Well, thanks for taking the time in your day, guys. Kevin, thanks, and Michael, thanks for sharing your time with us today, talking about the life of a judge.
Sounds like a book.
Yeah, Life of Pi.
The glamour, the fame, the fortune.
The infamy.
I think that probably infamy is the most applicable of any of those.
Yeah, it's one of the things about judging is when you're doing it right, you're probably not getting it noticed as well as when you're doing it wrong. I mean, I think players have got to a point, actually, I've seen in the last couple of years, where they're like, wow, that was a well-run tournament, I'm happy, and they're starting to say things like, thank you, that's great, and you do see some of that, but I think you're going to hear like 10 times the comments, 10 times quicker if something goes wrong. So it's unfortunate, and that's why judges have this community where we know what to look for when someone's doing well, and we can help encourage that kind of thing as well, because it's not necessarily visible to players.
Cool. Kevin, I know you have been pretty famous as a table judge for coverage matches.
Yeah.
I know a lot of times players at home will put on that coverage and see something go egregiously wrong. What kind of sagely advice can you share regarding your role as the table judge?
Should we spam the chat on Twitch, whatever, to tell you what's gone wrong?
That is one of the things that is a very easy answer. Absolutely not. I think that Twitter and like stream chat and stuff like that are good tools for conversing, but at the same time, things go wrong in games of Magic. Like that is a not uncommon occurrence, and there's not always going to be somebody there to fix it. So villainizing somebody or trying to fix the game state when you're just watching on stream is oftentimes not the best course of action. But what I can say is that in general, most of these on-camera mistakes get fixed pretty quickly and fairly effectively as well. For me, whenever I'm watching whenever I'm watching a feature match, I actually have my own life pad, and I keep track of everything like that, and I keep track of all of the important game state stuff and cards in hand and stuff like that. But that's just me, and I've been doing the table judging for a long time. So whenever you see me on camera, you know that it can be pretty well in hand. But I'd say that every other judge who gets on camera is doing about the same job that I am. They're all top-notch guys.
It's probably worth mentioning what the philosophy behind a table judge is, which is to say, like, it's changed. Like in the past, there was a year when the table judge was supposed to make sure the game was played 100% accurately and, everything was perfect. But they've got to the point where they don't want to provide extra service to a match simply because it's a feature match. And so players are obviously going to be, it's a lot quicker to get a judge because you're sitting there and you're able to get up on speed on what the issue is because you've been watching. So you do have that huge advantage actually. But you're not supposed to be, making sure the players don't make mistakes, for example, at this point in time, as far as I know. Is that right, Kevin?
Yeah, definitely. If there is somebody who's going to make a mistake, and I'm 100% certain that they're going to make a mistake, I'm not going to stop them from making the mistake. They're still going to make it and have to deal with the consequences of it. I'm not going to give them play advice, which is basically what that would be, stopping them from making a mistake. So, philosophy changes from year to year, but I think we're in a very good spot right now.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys, for sharing. Again, we appreciate your time and stories for the judging side of Magic tournaments. Any last thoughts before we close out?
No, I just want to say it was a pleasure being on the cast.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Thanks.
Thanks very much, guys. We appreciate it.
All right, so let's get to some listener feedback. I'm pretty shocked we have at least 2 listeners, so that's pretty good in my book.
Beyond us.
Yeah, even better.
Yes.
It was a little sad that Sean wasn't able to stick around and grill the judges on how he can get his opponents more game rule violations by playing Chalice of the Void and Suppression Field. But maybe our listeners have some good feedback or questions for us.
So please feel free to send questions literally whenever. We have nothing else to do, please. So we'll go to our Facebook page first, and the first question that we got in, actually the second question, but it's the one I'm looking at. So basically the question addresses the diversity in the format right now. So there's not just Maverick, Rug, and Stoneblade as the top decks. There's a lot of decks that are really competitive and are able to take the top slots. And this person wants us to analyze why this is so and stuff. End quote.
Oh, I love stuff.
I could talk about stuff for hours.
Stuff and things.
Yes.
So I think the first part was... Repeat that again. I don't have the question.
Basically just talking about diversity and why there are more than 3 decks that are doing well.
Diversity. I think we can pretty much sum that up in Legacy, and we could probably spend at least 2 hours talking about the diversity of Legacy. Part of it is because there's such a wide open and rich pool of cards from which to build decks. There's a ton of interactions. I think we talked about 4, at least 5 different decks in the previous section. And I think there's at least 20 more that all have potential of making a top 16 at a Star City event.
I agree. I mean, there's a lot of different strategies, and there's no strategy that beats all other strategies. And I think because you have so many different people who have been playing, differing amounts of time and have different likes and what have you, they're all playing different decks. So the reason why we have so much diversity is because we have so many different people. I mean, we have so many different people who have been playing the game for, 20 years versus 3 years versus 5 years. Card availability is also a way of diversification. And you'd have no dominant strategy that's better than all the rest at the moment. I mean, we're looking at, like this person has said, Maverick, Rug, and Stoneblade. Well, I mean, there's kind of an issue of, like, the whole rock, paper, scissors thing. You might have a couple of strategies that are, very good, very efficient in what they're trying to do, but they might be weak to another kind of deck that's maybe teetering on the outskirts of tournament dominance.
Right, and I think one key example, and I've done this kind of analysis on Legacy metagames before. Suppose we are just talking about Maverick, Rug, and Stoneblade. Well, even at their peak, those 3 decks combined didn't account for 40% of the total Legacy deck collection at a given tournament, for instance. When we're talking about the Rug deck being dominant, we're saying it's about 20%. So 1 in 5 people are playing that, and that's a dominant deck. Not like Standard, for instance, where when you see 40% of any given tournament being played by a single deck. So just based on that, you're only going to see maybe like a minority of the room is going to be playing a majority of the decks, but then you still have that, let's say 60% of the room playing, goblins, like graveyard strategy, dredge, hard combo, like Antartas, maybe a couple show and tell decks. So there's a lot of different ways to answer small vulnerabilities in a metagame.
For sure, you have so many people playing their pet deck who might just kind of tweak it over time. So say, it was never a good time to play Pox. But, I've got Abrupt Decay now, I can add in some Sylvan libraries. Oh, look, Pox is better than it was. And, oh, look, now I can take this to a tournament and maybe get some games. And it's supposed to, say, going 0-7 in a tournament.
Yeah.
There's always new cards coming out that fill some niche role in some deck that somebody's playing somewhere, maybe sometimes.
Right, and I think if we take a look at it at the opposite end, for instance, when we did have a period of low format diversity towards the latter end of Survival of the Fittest, then we saw a format that was essentially overrun by a single deck. And it wasn't, and that's not to say that 90% of the people in the room were playing the same deck. It's really more of like 30% of the people were playing the same deck, and it just so happened it was one of the better decks in the room. And that's when you lose that diversity, and everyone starts piling on to the same survival of the fittest, for instance. That's when you start to notice that, hey, maybe you do want some diversity. You don't want to have every matchup be exactly the same.
So I think also too, I mean, you also like diverse, also showing like not just that people are running 30% of the deck, like because you can still have a room where 30% of the people are playing this deck, but if you don't need any hate to beat it, and people are just playing it for the sake of playing it, then it's fine. But I think where you get an oppression kind of issue is where you have 30% of the people playing it, and anybody who's not playing that deck has to be playing, between 5 and 15 cards in their sideboard to actually beat this other deck. That's when you've got some sort of diversity problem.
Right, and diversity is definitely something we want to look for in a particular tournament, even in a particular format. It's what kind of gets the brewers' intuition and innovation happening in the room, in the metagame, in your city, whatever. Really just gets people thinking about it. It's like, oh, last week I played against this Pox deck, and I want to try to beat it because, Johnny really ticked me off. He destroyed my land and killed my creatures at the same time.
So then you started to bring in your Sacred Grounds, and all of a sudden, oh look, we've got somebody doing some critical thinking to start responding to a format-defining threat, or at least a local metagame issue.
It gets a lot of ideas flowing. It kind of turns over some of the old guard and makes a better experience for the player, being able to kind of crack the metagame, so to speak.
Okay, I think we've sufficiently kind of gone over that one, so thank you for that question. So the next one was, hey guys, I would love a section talking about playing graveyard strategies lately with Deathrite Shaman in the format. Talking about playing Tin Fins, Lands, High Tide, and Dredge are often affected by graveyard hate, and Deathrite Shaman is something I see quite often. So
this one's a kind of a tough question, it seems. Especially the decks listed. We have Tin Fins, which is a combo reanimator deck. Lands, which is a control. Reset High Tide, and I'm not quite sure how that fits in there. Maybe just all the instants and sorceries that the deck can generate into the graveyard. Maybe he's worried about his life total. Who knows? And Dredge, which is full-on graveyard.
So the question is, how is the format kind of changed, or how should this particular segment of the metagame change to deal with Deathrite Shaman? I think is basically what this person is trying to ask. So in your experience, Kobe, being a Tin Fins player for a little while, in fact, one of the people who actually generated some interest with this deck, how do you respond to Deathrite Shaman in the format?
Oh man, I curse up a storm. I bust out a bottle, start drinking, start writing nasty letters to R&D. No, I'm just kidding. But turn one Deathrite Shaman is pretty good against Tin Fins. My only real weapon of choice against, for instance, turn one Deathrite Shaman is to just win before it matters, or find a way to overload the Deathrite Shaman activations. Fortunately, Tin Fins does have the ability to both win on the first turn as well as overload it, like essentially a critical mass. And I feel like even a deck like Lands would be able to do that as well. Just being able to kind of cycle and keep Loam active. One of the tricks I know with the old aggro Loam deck was always keep a cycler in your hand ready in case your Loam gets targeted.
Yeah. I mean, I'm playing aggro Loam right now, and I mean, it's definitely, you have to look at the opponent. Like, I've played against Jund quite a bit, as well as a few other decks, and you have to see, like, you have to know that Deathrite Shaman is definitely going to be something you're going to have to play around. So you're a Loam-based deck, so what do you do to deal with that? You either have to pack removal for Deathrite Shaman, specifically, or you have to be going faster or overload them. So in Agrolome, one of the strategies now has been a move towards Devastating Dreams. Why? Well, you Devastating Dreams away, their 2-drop, or all their 1-drops, or their X1s, or whatever. What I'm saying is you sweep the board, you get rid of their Deathrite Shamans, make them not matter, then start loaming. with Reanimator or even Dredge, I mean, Dredge most of the time is able to overload one Deathrite Shaman. I mean, you're spitting your entire your entire deck into your graveyard. There's so many targets. Which one do they pick?
Right. I mean, one bad dredge I can see hurting the dredge player, but if they get two dredge cards off a single dredge, they're back in the game. As long as they can keep it up or they have some sort of Everfuel, that should get them forward pretty fast. I think you mentioned overloading with removal, and I think that's been the strategy lately with all the 3-color good stuff deck we've been seeing. For instance, Jund has access to cheap removal. Even Esper kind of changing it up, switching back to Stoneblade variations, and even some of the versions splashing the green and black for Deathrite Shaman.
Mm-hmm. Also, too, I mean, having some sort of recurrable removal. For example, lands is some lands players are switching to a build with Punishing Fires in it. Why? You have a nice answer that is a repeatable kill spell against Deathrite Shaman. So I mean, lands is pretty hard on the Life from the Loam plan. I mean, they do have backup Crucibles. They do have some cycling lands. I believe they're still playing them, but that might not be enough. Getting rid of the problem for good with a Punishing Fires is definitely something that you would want to look into as a lands player.
Right. Even the old mainstay Curse Totem might just be good enough against Deathrite Shaman.
Exactly.
Not the greatest, because they typically also attack Abrupt Decay, but it's a good stopgap measure. Epiphany Needle, too, also achieves the same effect.
I was actually going to add the same thing. I've been playing a Reanimator deck recently, and what I've moved towards is either being faster or overloading the graveyards such that Deathrite Shaman doesn't matter. So I've actually added Dark Rituals to the deck, so you can go turn 1, Entomb, Reanimate.
Oh, you're one step away from playing Shadowbeard and just winning on the spot.
Well, exactly. But I'm not quite there yet. Or, the possibility is you could run a card like Buried Alive. The card's very narrow. I know I'm just doing some testing right now, but maybe it's good enough. Maybe putting 3 things in the graveyard and then running, say, Exhume as opposed to a targeted piece of reanimation might be something. Because recall that Exhume says choose, not target.
Yeah, that's a very interesting, very finite slice of that rules knowledge. Knowing that you can essentially change up your target if something goes wrong. Well, it's not even a target. You just choose the card when it resolves.
Yeah, so if you were to say if you were to Buried Alive 3 Gristlebrands, and your opponent has an active Deathrite Shaman, and you have Exhume, next turn, so say they get rid of one of them, and they're ready for the other activation, you've got 2 left and they're ready for you when you cast Exhume, they're going to basically just be shit out of luck. So, yeah, if you guys do have any questions, please send them.
All right. So, again, it's kind of a stunted week. We don't have Sam and Sean, but thanks for stopping by and listening anyway. This is the Everyday Eternal podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Corey, along with Matt Pavlik.
Hello.
And tune in next time. We don't know what's in store, but we hope it's going to be a good talk.